Vladislav Igorevich Rozlakov was an 18-year-old kid from western Crimea, a small country located just below the Ukraine. Slim's childhood would be a challenge to say the least. When he was 10 years old, his father would suffer an extreme head injury that would significantly change his behavior. His once loving father would begin to physically abuse Slim's and the rest of his family. While Slim's would get away from his father fairly quickly, it would leave a very dark impression on him for the rest of his life. As the years went by, he became more and more withdrawn. His grades at school began to drop lower and lower and lower. He had very little friends, and he began to get a hobby for weapons. Meanwhile, on August 18th, 2014, the Big Slim's YouTube channel would be created for the first time, and 4 days later, its first and only video would be uploaded. It's a 4-minute long video of Slim's playing the Minecraft game Sky Wars. It wasn't really popular, and up until the events which made Slim infamous, all those events unfolded, he would only have 22 subscribers on his channel. In 2015, Slims would apply to the Kirch Polytech College, and this is where his behavior really began to go downhill. He not only had his interest in weapons, but he also gained an interest in explosives. And it's not confirmed, no evidence has been submitted to support this, but some claim that he was bullied while at the college. For one reason or another, he began to grow a deep, deep hatred of his school and the people inside it. However, this would only be the beginning. A more disturbing interest would also pop up around this time. Roslakov would allegedly discuss the 2 Columbine shooters and would specifically cite Eric Harris as one of his biggest inspirations regarding his future actions. In various group chats, sometimes under a pseudonym, he would express how it would be cool to carry out his very own massacre. However, for one reason or another, police would not be contacted. In September of 2018, he would purchase $500 worth of guns and ammunition, and on October 17th, 2018, he would enter the school that he attended for 3 years and open fire on anyone he saw. The shooting would only last for 15 minutes. But in those 15 minutes, Roslakov would take the lives of 20 people, 15 of his students and 5 teachers. He himself would end his massacre by taking his own life right outside the school library. The most disturbing element of the Big Slim's YouTube channel, at least to me, would not be from any content produced by Roslakov himself. Instead, it would be the fact that his subscriber count would grow by over 5,000 after the attacks. While a lot of these individuals are probably just doing it to be edgy, there have been copycat attacks inspired by Roslakov's actions. Most infamously, where a 15-year-old boy would attack people with an axe. Thankfully, no one was killed in this event, but he would send the girl to a hospital. Today, the Big Slim's account is still alive on YouTube, being a haunting glimpse into an individual who would commit a horrific atrocity.
Austin Jones is a 32-year-old musician who was most famous for his a cappella covers here on YouTube. He would have a very troubled childhood growing up. His sister would pass away when he was only 6. He would have to endure his abusive father and then go through a divorce between his parents. His father would later die of an overdose, and his childhood home would burn to the ground, all before the age of 16. Austin would fall into periods of depression during this time, the bouts being so intense that he would turn to dangerous coping mechanisms such as self-harm. However, during these bouts, Austin would find solace in a much more healthy way, creating his very own music. Around the same time that Austin was discovering his calling, a new website dedicated to sharing anyone's creations was just beginning to take off, and early on, Austin would be one of its creators. Austin would create his YouTube account on July 3rd, 2007. On his new account, he would primarily release covers of at the time popular songs that Austin enjoyed. As it turns out, Austin was pretty good at this sort of thing, and he would quickly develop himself a fan base that only continued to grow and grow. By 2010, Austin was beginning to write his own material and even released a whole album. It seemed that Austin was going to follow in the footsteps of people like The Weeknd and Justin Bieber, artists who were at one point very small, but through sites such as YouTube would grow into global superstars. But just as Austin's career was about to fully take off, word would spread about some very disturbing actions that were done by Austin. On May 10, 2015, entertainment news website pupfresh.com would run a story about Austin alleging that he was having inappropriate conversations with underage fans. These allegations would quickly be verified with evidence, the most damning of all being a chat conversation where Austin would request a twerking video from one of these underage fans. The fan did not know what twerking was, so Austin would send a video of himself twerking for her to demonstrate how it was done. After being kicked off of Vans Warped Tour in 2015, Austin would attempt to do some damage control by making a video called Setting the Record Straight, a sort of apology / explanation / please think of me as the victim type of video. Now this would get Austin nothing but negative feedback upon its release. People would tear the video to shreds, talking about how it seemed to paint himself as a victim and, more importantly, severely downplayed Austin's actions. Now, you would think something like asking an underage fan for sexually suggestive videos would mark the complete end for Austin. Well, actually, this controversy would honestly be forgotten about pretty quickly, and Austin would enter his most successful period yet. He would start ramping up productions of his a cappella videos, some of these videos gaining nearly 10 million views. In a matter of 2 years, Austin would gain over 400,000 subscribers. And remember, this was after the whole twerking controversy. By mid-2017, Austin had 540,000 subscribers, and it seemed like he was going to break through as a superstar any day. But while his fans and the general public might have forgotten about his little texting scandal, the feds did not. On May 27, 2017, Austin would upload a video titled, "I Need Your Help." In the video, he talks about Facebook taking down his covers and directs his fans to a new page where he would upload his songs, but Austin would not be able to upload any new songs.
Star with a large teenage following is headed to prison. A judge sentenced Austin Jones to 10 years behind bars. The 26-year-old singer pleaded guilty to child pornography back in February. Jones, who is from Bloomingdale, was accused of coercing 6 underage fans to send him sexually explicit videos. Several of those victims delivered impact statements in the Chicago courtroom this afternoon.
On June 9, 2017, a United States judge would sign a search warrant on Jones's property. The search was conducted on June 12th, and Austin would be arrested the same day. Turns out, in the 2 years since the initial controversy, Austin, now with hundreds of thousands of more adoring underage fans, would message them to groom and manipulate them into creating and sharing sexually explicit content. This time, however, it would be even worse than twerking videos. The content was so repulsive that law enforcement would deem the material to be illegal. Austin would not be able to fight the allegations against him this time, and on February 1st, 2019, Austin would be pled guilty to 2 counts of producing illegal material involving minors. Austin would be sentenced to 10 years in prison for his actions. His sentence started on June 28, 2019, and his earliest possible release date is December 31st, 2027. After he is released from prison, he will have to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life.
At a surface glance, Adam Britton seemed like a very admirable man. From an early age, he had an interest in animals, specifically crocodiles. In 1992, he would graduate with a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Leeds. 4 years later, he would get his PhD from the University of Bristol, which means he was no longer Adam Britton, he was now Dr. Adam Britton. Pretty quickly, Adam would find himself alongside some of the most well-known zoologists and biologists in the entire world, such as this individual, Sir David Attenborough. Obviously, having connections like that, he would make a name for himself pretty quickly, and he would begin to appear on TV screens. One example of this being an Animal Planet show called Animal Face-Off. He would appear in 3 of the 9 episodes in a major role. He would also appear in a 2007 BBC show called Natural World as a main presenter. However, Adam's work was mostly done behind the scenes. He didn't really have the intention on becoming the next Steve Irwin. Adam would instead dedicate himself to studying animals and their conservation. Also, apparently he once, quote, helped Prince Harry catch a crocodile. I just found that interesting. He would start a animal ranch on his property in Australia in order to rescue and, theoretically, nurse back to health sick animals. But we'll come back to that later, actually. Even though Adam's intentions weren't to be in the spotlight, he would still upload various clips of his appearances and clips he shot himself onto his YouTube channel, a channel known as krayzkrok. Now, you're probably wondering at this point, how did someone like this end up in a video like this? The trouble begins with the channel's most recent upload, and what will likely turn out to be its final upload. Around 2021, some of the most horrific videos imaginable would begin to surface on the dark web. Going into as little detail as possible, they all included the indescribable torture, abuse, and eventually murder of dogs. Many of them still being puppies. The person who was uploading this was anonymous, but online they went by the username Cerberus. Pretty much it's a figure in Greek mythology of a three-headed hound. Eventually, someone who was outside of Cerberus' circle of sick animal abusers would find the video and would be absolutely disturbed. Disturbed to the point where they would contact local authorities and would then begin an exhaustive search for one of the dogs featured in the dark web video. Eventually, they traced its collar back to a plot of land in Australia, and they launched a raid in April of 2022 where Cerberus would be unmasked.
This story is hard to tell, and I need to warn you, it will be hard to watch. It's about the grotesque crimes of Dr. Adam Britton. Publicly, Britton portrayed himself as a wildlife warrior, a Darwin-based crocodile expert who made nature documentaries. At times, he even worked alongside Sir David Attenborough. But he hid a despicable secret. In 2022, he was arrested, accused of vile acts of animal cruelty, and last month was sentenced to 10 years in jail for of as many as 42 dogs.
As it turned out, Cerberus would turn out to be, of all people, Adam Britton. Just like that, his persona of a kind, animal-loving person would be destroyed in the most dramatic way possible. When authorities raided his property, they found what was essentially a house of horrors where dogs would be tortured and killed. They even found the various objects that would be used for the killings, and it's very, very disturbing, as you can tell. Bringing it back to Adam's YouTube channel, his, at the time, final upload would be Bolt and Ursa running HD. As it turns out, those two dogs would be some of the first he abused. However, one very, very small bright spot is that unlike the other ones, they would make it out alive. In August of 2024, Adam would be sentenced to 10 years and 5 months in prison, with the possibility of parole in 6. Now, with the crimes I just described, obviously that's way too short of a sentence, but it gets even darker. There's one more aspect of this case that makes it just that much more scarier, and it's what they found on Adam's computer. If you've ever taken any crime or psychology class, you know that the first sign of a serial killer is someone who abuses animals, and obviously Adam would fit that description pretty well. However, for the most part, his crimes were only to animals. There were never any human victims of Adam. However, when authorities searched his computer, they found at least 10 cases of CSAM. The material law enforcement described as some of the worst of its caliber, and that introduces the idea that once Adam's prison sentence is over, that his spree of crimes can branch out to actual people. However, thankfully, we don't have to worry about that for at least another 3 years minimum.
Unlike most YouTubers, Pedro Rodrigues Filho wouldn't be creating content on YouTube until the age of 63, which indeed is a very long time to be making this content. However, unlike the creators discussed beforehand, their crimes were already committed, and they were already known to the world around them. And unlike all of the other creators featured in this video, this man might have, and when I mean might have, I mean a very iffy might, had justification. Pedro was born on the 29th of October in 1954. From the very start of his life, Pedro would face significant hardships before he was even born. He would receive damage to his skull due to his mother being kicked in the stomach by his abusive father. After Pedro was born, the abuse would not stop. It would in fact continue well into the first 13 years of his life. The violence that Pedro endured would forever leave a mark in his mind, and it wouldn't be long that the marks and scars on his mind would manifest into acts of violence from Pedro himself. In 1968, Pedro's father would be fired from his job as a school guard due to accusations of him stealing. Pedro would respond to this by murdering the town's deputy mayor in front of the town's city hall. Then, a month later, he would claim his second victim, another school guard who Pedro suspected to be the real thief. But my question is it the actual thief, Pedro, or was you just going cuckoo? The following 5 years of Pedro's life would be spent on the run, but his crime spree was just getting started. Dozens of people would die at the hands of Pedro in very violent ways in the following years. But here's where the story starts to become, well, morally gray. Pedro's targets have been debated over the years. We don't even know the full amount of victims that this man has decided to murder. And some of the stories told about him are just that, stories. But what we do know is that Pedro will kill around 100 people during his lifetime. A little over half of these people were committed before his first arrest. And Pedro, would view himself as a vigilante type figure because law enforcement basically failed to stop the real actual criminals. And so what he decided to do is that I'm going to be Batman and I'm going to handle these people myself since the police can't do it themselves. That's a real brave man. Salute to him at least. Many of Pedro's victims in the early 70s will be drug traffickers and gang members. And as time moved on, he would further immerse himself into the criminal world of Brazil. I didn't mean to say word, I mean world. Into the criminal world of Brazil. Eventually, he would meet a woman known as Maria Olympia. Two would quickly hit it off into a relationship, but however, it would all come crashing down in 1971 when Maria was murdered by a rival gang member. And so, in response and in retaliation, Pedro decided to do one thing to make things right. Murder every single gang member of that gang out of revenge. It's around the same time frame that Pedro will commit his most brutal murder, a murder against the very man he killed for to begin with. Sometime in the early 1970s, Pedro's mother would be brutally murdered by Pedro's father. Pedro would respond by breaking into his father's jail cell and stabbing him 22 times. And most disturbingly, he would finish this crime off by cutting out and eating a small piece of his father's heart. With crimes this brutal, Pedro could not evade law enforcement forever. His luck would eventually end on the 24th of May in 1973, which would result in him spending the next 34 years of his life behind bars. But on the contrary to what you might think, Pedro's crimes were not over. In fact, they were only halfway through them. 47 prisoners would die at the hands of Pedro over the next 34 years. The majority of these prisoners were men who committed the worst of the worst, such as murder and... However, Pedro's actual motives cannot be fully determined. One murder was due to a poor handshake, according to him, Pedro, that is immature. And it was widely reported that one victim was killed because of his snoring. Okay, Pedro, this is getting really immature now. Come on now. Well, it seems that someone like Pedro would spend the rest of his life in prison. That would not be the case. Why? Because Pedro was released on April 24th of 2007 due to Brazil's insane prison laws not allowing inmates to stay behind bars for over 40 years. And Pedro's killing spree had essentially come to an end at this point. But it wouldn't be long before he found himself in trouble with the law. Again, Pedro will once again return to prison on September 15, 2011 for charges related to riots Pedro participated in during his initial prison stay. But even still, he wouldn't be in prison for terribly long because he will be released in late 2018, forget this, for good behavior. But once again, after making it out of prison, we will reach the point in Pedro's story where he will create a YouTube channel. which was titled This. He will go live on this channel on December 4th, 2020, and his videos will consist of Pedro's opinions on crimes in Brazil and his discouragement of other individuals who would take up vigilantism like he did all those years ago. Another channel that primarily featured Pedro was known as This Channel. It still currently holds 200k subscribers. Pedro seemed to have completely reinvented himself, and his views proved that he had a bright future ahead on this platform. However, though, Pedro's life will suddenly come to a final tragic end on the 5th of March 2023, where Pedro will come to a sudden end after he was shot by an unknown group of assailants in what appeared to be a drive-by shooting. And to this day, no suspects have been announced, and the case remains cold. Today, Pedro is seen as a highly controversial and divisive figure. Many argue that he killed many in cold blood, while others argue that he only went after the worst of the worst in our society, protecting the people from some of the most wicked individuals this world had to offer. However you feel about him, one thing I can think everyone can collectively agree on is that Pedro's 2 channels are a fascinating look into the mind of one of the most deadliest serial killers ever to walk on this earth.
Natalie McNally was 15 weeks pregnant at the time of her murder. It took place on the 18th of December, 2022. The attack was brutal. It is one of the most disturbing crime scenes imaginable. Without a doubt, the individual who committed this was a man of pure evil, and they needed to find him at all costs. Pretty quickly, 32-year-old Stephen McCullough was arrested for Natalie's murder. However, he had an alibi. He was live streaming on the night it occurred, making it impossible for him to be the killer. Stephen started his YouTube channel, Vote Saxon 07, on the 5th of April, 2010. He did switch channels a couple times throughout his 13-year run on YouTube, but his content more or less remained the same. Toy reviews. Specifically toy reviews on franchises that he liked, like Star Wars, Marvel, Ghostbusters, Pokemon, and most frequently, Doctor Who. Doctor Who was his favorite of the bunch and would be his most frequent video topic. Stephen would never gain a huge following here on the platform, but he would have a group of dedicated fans that followed him all throughout his 13-year stay on YouTube. Entering the early 2020s, it seems that his career on YouTube was looking brighter and brighter, and his life would get even more brighter when Natalie entered his life. The two would meet in the middle of 2022 and would hit it off pretty quickly. In fact, the relationship escalated so quickly that Natalie would announce to her family that she was pregnant and that Thanksgiving of the same year. She planned to name the child Dean, which makes her murder, just days before Christmas mind you, all the more heartbreaking. 3 suspects would be arrested in the weeks following Natalie's murder. One of those suspects being Stephen, but as we mentioned earlier, he was live streaming at the time, so it couldn't have been him. 2 other suspects were also arrested, but it became clear that they had nothing to do with the case, so they were released quickly, and their identities have never been made public. The search for Natalie's killer was going nowhere. That wasn't until investigators decided to take another look at Stephen's channel. The day after Natalie's murder, he uploaded another video like it was business as usual. On January the 15th, he uploaded another video like it was business as usual. It seemed rather odd. And then they took a look at what would come to be Stephen's final live stream. While the live streaming alibi seems like a pretty open and shut case at first glance, once you begin to look a little deeper, the water gets more and more muddy. So let's talk about that live stream. During the stream, he was chilling, he was having a few drinks, he was playing some Vice City. However, his behavior during the stream was odd, to say the least. For one, throughout the live stream, he kept reiterating that this is happening live on a live stream that is live. He says it over and over and over again. But then one of the biggest discrepancies comes when it turns out that he didn't read a single bit of chat. And he acknowledged this in the stream. He said that technical difficulties were preventing him from reading chat, and he says it over and over and over again. And then eventually he starts saying stuff like, "I don't like streamers who read chat." He's pretty much overcompensating for a very small issue. However, the most damning part of the live stream comes a little later on. And I want to warn you, the clip I'm about to show you does contain strong language, but due to the context, I have decided to leave it in unedited.
Yeah, that's physics. That's what would happen in the real world. Abso-fucking-natly. Abso-fucking-natly.
After the live stream inconsistencies made themselves apparent, the police would rearrest Stephen, and in their custody he would admit that the live stream was not streamed on December the 18th, but rather recorded days prior. This essentially gave investigators a green light to conduct search warrants on him, and when they looked through his internet history, they found questions such as, is it more painful to die by drowning or being burnt alive? Or, how about, is it more painful to be shot in the head than stabbed in the heart? Stephen's case for innocence would only get more and more worse when it came to light that he left his phone at the house of Natalie's parents the night after she was murdered, and he had secretly made an audio recording of them, I guess to determine whether or not they thought he was guilty or innocent. It's one of the more disturbing murder cases I've ever read about. It's the first time I've ever heard of someone using a live stream as an alibi for a murder, and then having that alibi fall completely apart. Stephen has not been found guilty in a court of law yet, so I cannot for 100% certainty say he is the killer. But the evidence is overwhelming, and if he is found guilty, then that would mean that he used his very own YouTube channel, the same place where he grew a devoted fan base, to cover his tracks for one of the worst crimes imaginable. If all of that is true, then Vote Saxon 07 is one of the most disturbing YouTubers of all time.